of this as you're listening to almost like a live podcast. And today I'm just going to ask questions and participate with Jarrell and Diane. And then as we're going, you can comment or use the Q&A to chime in as well. But we're going to get started. And Jarrell, where I think we should start today is just talking about heritage and inheritance. And when people hear inheritance, they might initially think money that they get when someone dies, but we're talking about it on a grander scale than that.
Mhm.
So can you just jump in on that with us and talking about why it's important to understand that from your perspective, which will be different from my perspective growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, inheritance matters, legacy matters, heritage matters. And to understand what that means to me and what that looks like, again, hopefully gives you some additional perspective on where I sit and maybe where other Black people sit or feel or think, as you try to understand, what is this connection.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, what we hear is, well, this is something that my ancestors did, or so on and so forth, and that I'm not going to feel guilty for it. And that's not the hope, and that's not the goal. My intention is not to make you feel guilty, in any shape, form, or fashion. But the history is important because it shapes everything. It shapes
Yeah.
perspective. And so, what I want to help you understand is that, oftentimes I think when we think about, slavery or racism or things like that, we feel like they're things that are hundreds of years ago and that things have drastically changed and they have, but that, like that was something that was for another time. And I would say that it is, and it isn't. And I think the best example I can give to give you that perspective is to talk about my mom. And my mom and Diane, I think you may be the same age or 1 year apart. And your son, which we always joke about, is this: we're the same age, right? Your son and I, which is always just fun and
She
interesting.
loves being reminded of
Yes.
that.
But I think one of the things to understand that's so important is that there's some opportunities, um, and things that were available to Diane that weren't available to my mom or my dad, right? Because it's the same situation with Tom, right, Diane's husband, and my dad's about 10 years or so older than my mom, so it's even more so for him. And the reality is that my parents, couldn't go to any university that they wanted to, assuming that they could get into that university, or they couldn't sit anywhere they wanted to on a bus. My parents had to go into the back doors of department stores, and they couldn't use certain lunch counters. They had to sit in certain sections of a theater or of a church. Um, and also, so again, we're not talking about something that happened where no one's around that it happened to. These are the stories of my parents. And so I think it's really important to understand that this is present and it's a reality. And the thing that I think is important to understand, and I thank God for my mom's perspective, is that she realized that education was really important. And she, did the best that she could for herself, but she also realized how important it was for me. And so to that end, she realized that if I were to go to the schools, my local schools, that the odds were against me because of the quality of the education and the facilities and the support, that you find in one of those in a good school setting, essentially. So what she determined was from kindergarten on that she'd put me in private school. And again, my mom started out with not the opportunity, so my mom didn't make it to college, um, but she knew that education was important, even though her circumstances didn't give her the opportunity. And so from kindergarten through 12th grade, I was in private schools because the only way that I was going to get a quality education from her perspective was to do that, to put me in a school where, they had better resources and so on and so forth. And I think the thing to think about, like from your perspective, when you think about public schools, maybe you think about schools like Warren, right, or Woodland,
Right.
were excellent, right, and even those schools were better than my private school. So this is not a knock on public education. This is about what public education was in my community,
Mm.
and it wasn't like going to a Warren. It wasn't a place where there were lots of resources, and it wasn't due to lack of effort. But again, certain things are just not available. So she chose to put me in private school, and that made a big difference in my life because a lot of the kids from my neighborhood that I initially grew up in before we, moved out of our neighborhood, our black neighborhood, um, they didn't make it. Now, there are
Mm.
lots of things to contribute to the fact that didn't make it. But education was one of the key things that caused them not to make it. Whereas most of my friends who were from that neighborhood who had the opportunity to get into private school was able to make it out. And that's who most of my friends are today, successful black men and women who've been able to accomplish things. And, again, I guess one thing to understand is that I'm not a product of the system. I'm here in spite of the system, right? But
Mm.
most people are stuck, and by system, I don't mean anything other than the educational construct, that neighborhood, all the things that go in or happen in that neighborhood, right? Along with that neighborhood being a neighborhood where opportunities were new. It was only just now becoming a reality that you didn't have to sit on the bus. You didn't have, I mean, you didn't have to sit on the back of the bus, so you couldn't go to a certain,
Mhm.
and so on and so forth. So when you think about people my age, right, there were lots of them who did not have the opportunities I had because they didn't have a parent or parents who were capable of maintaining a private school education. And I dare to think, I shudder to think where I'd be right now, right, which is probably with most of my friends who didn't. And again, there's some that did make it, but the majority
Sure.
of them did not. And then, when I talk about inheritance and legacy and heritage, these are things that are important to all of us. And, I think about, you think about what if, right? And you can't go too far down the what if road, but, what if my mom did have access to the things that she wasn't given access to, right?
Mm.
How much further in life she might be as a result of being restricted from being able to do certain things and access certain opportunities. You know, again, my mom spent 13 years paying for private school education. What if what if the schools in the community were good schools, like a Warren, where I could have gone to the public school and had a higher rate of opportunity for success? Those 13 years of private school tuition, I could have used that for college, right? So there is it does affect.
Yeah.
The history has the history affects now. And we try not to think that it does, but again, this is not some long story from a long time ago. This is just a generation ago. And at this point, we're talking about me and my mom. That's 2 generations. That's not some period of time that's just unbelievably long ago. And I heard just the other, well, actually was today, a statement which is interesting. When you think about like the freeing of slaves, that was 5 generations ago. Relatively speaking, that's not some distance thing when we're talking about five
Right.
generations, right? So I think about my great grandmother who I did grow up and had the opportunity to know for probably the first 18 or so years of my life, right? She died in the 90s, so she probably was born around 1900. She's been a part of that system, and so and even more entrenched than the one that my mom grew up in. And so there's a legacy, there's a heritage of of a lack of opportunity, and that doesn't get corrected by all of a sudden saying, okay, as of 1960s, okay, you can vote, you can do this, you can do that.
Right.
you're allowed to go to schools, and then expect generationally that you're going to see this sharp turn, because these people started out in a system that wasn't for them. So you're now seeing the fruits of what you know what I guess you're now seeing the fruits now of what happened in the 1960s.
Right.
Even though my story is in spite of that, because what I did see as I got older and got into high school, and we started to compete with other public schools, that there were more and more students who were involved in things like academic games and speech and debate and things like that we participated in. And we had lots and lots of students that participated. They had a handful, but at this point in my teens, they're just now starting to show up into those kind of things. So
Yeah.
I think, again, this is not about an excuse, because
Right. Right.
personality matters. And I want everyone to understand that. But it's about having some perspective about where we actually are.
Yeah, it's like collective consciousness, almost, right? Like these things don't, you carry these things into the next generation, some awareness or consciousness of
Hmm.
what was. I mean, I'll never forget when you and I were sitting in our office and you said your mom couldn't sit wherever she wanted on the bus. Like I remember reading about that in school in my history class. And it's, Rosa Parks is always the one that everybody talks about. And when I would imagine Rosa Parks in that situation, it seemed like I must be reading ancient history. But then when you said, no, my mom, like, who I hope I get to meet, but like your mom had to go through that all of a sudden I went, whoa, this was not long ago. Like you said, slaves were freed a long time ago. But segregation and out in the open racism, I mean, that your mom experienced that. That's just unbelievable to me.
Yeah.
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 And another disappointment of mine is my dad with regard to, again, the same thing with regard to opportunity. My dad is an excellent golfer, like excellent. He's in his, you know, early 80s now, but he still plays 36 holes a weekend. And he's always played 36 holes a weekend. 18
Mm.
on Saturday and 18 on Sunday, and a couple of nights at the driving range. And, I think about how good he was at golf, but the municipal courts that he participated, that he used, blacks could only use them 1 day a week.
Wow.
How much better would he be if he could have used the municipal courts more frequently than once a week, assuming that, he had the opportunity to on the day that he was allowed to use it? I remember as a kid going to, golf matches and tournaments and what have you. And he would always place, and this was amateur stuff, but he'd always place first, second, and third. I mean, our house had trophies on top of trophies on top of trophies, because that's how we spent our entire summer, traveling
Mm.
to Biloxi and Florida and Pensacola, all these places, and him doing just amateur tournaments. But by the time things had opened up, he's already in his 40s, right? So the opportunity has more or less passed him by. And again, what could it have been if he had been given the opportunity? And so again, legacy, heritage, you know, inheritance matters.
Yeah, 'cause it's like what I'm saying. I got it for me because I'm thinking about it's easy for me to go, well, things have changed now. It is open up now, and you have opportunity, but you're carrying that understanding and that knowledge and that story in your mind from your dad and from your mom that affects how you experience everything, right? Like that just I think we sometimes want to believe that we can just put it in a box and we can leave that back in the 50s and 60s. um, but the kids who grew up with parents like you who experienced that weighs on your consciousness today
Yeah,
and will weigh on your kids, right?
right. And again, it affects how things go, and um, it's about breaking cycles.
Mm,
They're not easy to break, right? And so
right.
if the history of my cycle is already a challenged one, it's hard to get over that hump. And like I was talking with a friend, um, and we were talking about divorce, and what he said was that you know when he got married, his older brother said, "You got to break the cycle."
Mm.
I forgot the statistic or whatever it was. I felt like he might have said that 75% of families that are part of divorce, the kids grow up and end up in divorce. And there's a connection there, right? It's a
Yeah.
legacy, right? It's a heritage, right? And so again, when we're talking about people passing things on, and we're saying, well, I'm passing on this limited knowledge because I had limited opportunity. Well, it's not inconceivable that that the same thoughts and processes and get passed on in part because you just don't know as much, right?
Right.
Uh, I was the first person in my family to go to college, and this has nothing to do with race, but it's about the whole point of moving forward. So what my mom couldn't help me understand is what it means to go, what does it look like to go to college? How do you think about it? How do you prep for it? And so on and so forth. But now that Jarrell is, entering his senior year, I'm like, okay, well, you got to make sure you got your ACT and your SAT. And you need to make sure that you have your applications in, by January. And you need to have, because again, I have an experience now that I can pass forward. But if I don't have that experience, if I don't break out of it, then I'm destined to repeat it. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. A word that comes to my mind, Jarrell, is expectations. Um,
That's
I
good.
know you very graciously reminded all the people who are with us that I am not the same age as you are, which I believe they all have thought all this time that we are very equivalent in age. But now that that's out there in the open, expectations. Your mom had expectations for your life as an adult. Interestingly, although I totally agree, and I believe that I was privileged as a white student. My parents did not have expectations that I would go to college. My parents were pretty much blue collar. Um, they pretty much told me when I was growing up, girls don't go to college. you
Mhm.
know
Mm.
and fortunately I had teachers and I had counselors in school who said, you're going to college, you need to go to college. And I got in New York State, I got a Regent scholarship, paid for tuition at a state university. But the expectation, it's interesting because I didn't have to overcome the same kind of limitations that you did, but I had different ones, and I I could have gone on to be whatever I wanted. I mean, I could have chosen any school I wanted, So there's that identification too, with your mom a little bit, and it helps me to understand the limitations that she was under, and the expectations that she had for you. So my expectation for my kids, you're going to college. I mean,
Right.
there's just no doubt about it, So it's interesting. That's, yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So this shifts gears a little bit, but I think um, will help illustrate a little bit of the difference in growing up and just perspective and how our understanding of the world is shaped by the opportunities that we have and the things that we experience. Diane, not long ago, you shared a story about when I think you were in high school, and the difference between your church, which was the Methodist church, and the
Right.
Black Methodist church that was in town. Can you share that story?
Yeah. This is a good memory of mine. I was active in our church, in the youth group, and I forget how this happened, but occasionally, maybe 3, 4, half a dozen times when I was in high school, we would go to the AME church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church in town. It's a very small building, small number of people, and our youth group would sing, or I don't know, we did skits or something. I can't even remember that. But that was when I first came to realize that you didn't have to be quiet while the pastor was talking, because there was all kinds of preach it, brother, and yeah, amen, hallelujah. And I remember thinking, that is the coolest thing ever. you can actually talk, and it made me, and today, I mean, I sit in the back normally because, I got stuff to do on Sunday mornings when we're in the building, but hey, amens and, praise Gods are coming out of my mouth too. And every time that I feel that in me, I think about that experience that I learned from them, something that was totally foreign to my experience. And I just loved it. It could
Was
have
there
been a great
anybody in your
job.
group that thought that was wrong?
You know
I
what?
think where you thought it was cool, did anybody go, wow, you shouldn't do that in church?
I don't remember specifics, but I am almost positive that that was probably a topic of conversation, as we went back home to our church. Like, well, do you hear that guy in the back, and talking to himself or something? To me, it was just like, wow, it's like interactive,
Yeah.
So it's just an interesting memory for me, one that I do enjoy,
Yeah. Because I feel like there would, there probably were people that thought you shouldn't do that. That's disrespectful, right?
Oh yeah, and I don't even think I probably mentioned it to my parents. It was probably because I was real shy and introverted. I probably didn't verbalize what I thought, but I mean, that's a long time ago for me, decades. And the memory, I can picture that church and sitting in it, and the memory is really, really clear to me. And it's just kind of opened my mind to, whoa, that's different, kind of like it.
And
Yeah.
I think that, to what Josh was alluding to, and I think that's one of the challenges that we have, which is why talking is so important, is that different isn't necessarily wrong.
That's right.
Right. And what happens is we grow up in a certain way or a certain culture, and we start to think that this is the right way or maybe the only way. And then we experience something different, and because we've been taught that this is the right way or the wrong way, then we think that anyone that does it differently is wrong, and it's not wrong, it's just different. And sometimes things are wrong, but that's not always the case. And so, if we just kind of think about your experience, right? Granted, you loved it when you went to the African Methodist Episcopal Church, but my assumption is you were probably taught that, well, you shouldn't talk during the sermon while the pastor's speaking. It's wrong. It's disrespectful, right? And maybe there was a consequence for it if you did do that. And that's what you were taught. So then if it could have been a different experience where then you leave your church, go to the Black church, and then you see it and you think, well, that's wrong. They shouldn't be doing that. And the truth told is it's not wrong. It's just different, right? No differently than if one of the kids from the Black church came to your church and thought, well, this is wrong. They don't even like the pastor's message.
It's true, right? Like you might think that, like, oh, he must really not be hitting it today because nobody cares around here.
But and that's how a lot of the things, biases and stuff get created, is because we live our life like this.
Yeah.
Because it's the only way we've ever seen it done. When we see it outside of that, sometimes it's not just different, it's wrong. And the reality is that it's okay not to talk in church during the sermon, and it's okay to talk in church during the sermon, depending on the nature in the service. And that's the thing that only conversation can fix that. Because if you were to have thought, well, that's wrong, you would have been left with, they don't do church correctly. They're rude and disrespectful. Right. But in conversation, it's like, well, no, when we do that, this is to uplift and so on and so forth. And it's like, oh, actually, it's not wrong. It's just different. Or the other side, like, why are you so quiet? Quiet because we're reflective or this, that, or the other. Oh, that's why you do it. Only conversation fixes that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes
so many areas. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
There's just so many areas that's true in. I mean, there, parenting styles, between different cultures, not just Black and white, but, other parts of the world. And today, because the world is so small, we get to rub shoulders with people a lot more who have these different ways of doing things, expressing things. And you're so absolutely right. It's different is not wrong. And Yeah, I just love that whole thought. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think of I've been to Haiti twice. This
Oh,
really is less
yeah.
a race difference than it's more a cultural difference, but that it's
Yeah.
not wrong when they're different. I remember we were headed to church, and the plan had been, I think, to be at church at like 10 o'clock. And I looked at my watch and it was like 10:20. I mean, we were already 20 minutes late, and I knew it was at least another 5-minute walk to the church building. And I looked at our host and I said, I feel so bad that we're late. Like, I just can't believe we're going to be this late. And he said, my friend, you're in Haiti. And in Haiti, church starts when the preacher gets there. And you're preaching today. So we couldn't be late. And I remember walking in and nobody batted an eye. Nobody was upset. Nobody was bothered. Like, I really had to wrestle with, like, it's a very American thing, I think, to worry
Oh,
about this time. But I thought we were doing something wrong. To them, that was totally normal. And then that same trip, we visited a church, and right in the middle of his sermon, the pastor answered his cell phone. And he was preaching, and he stopped to answer his phone, and he had a conversation twice. It happened 2 times. And like, I'm sitting there and I'm going, man, that is so rude and like, inappropriate and blah, blah, blah. It's normal there. Like that. Like, I want it, to Jarrell's point, I want to categorize it as wrong because it's different from how I do it, or it's different from how I've always experienced things. And that's just not necessarily true. Right.
it's a
And I
big
think that it's
lesson for us
important
to
for us to
learn.
keep it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a huge lesson for all of us to learn. No matter what culture we're from or what color we are, it's
Yeah.
huge. Yeah.
Jarrell, we'll mention the video again later, but you sent me a YouTube video today. And one of the things, there's a great dude in it that does all the talking. And one of the things that really struck me that I thought was so good, he said, we become afraid of what's unknown and different. Like, that's the knee jerk is fear. And I think that sometimes that's why we want to categorize it as wrong, because if it's wrong, then we don't really need to be afraid of it. But if there's something to it, then that could have an effect on us,
Right.
Yeah.
and maybe cause us to question our own way of doing life. So I think
Things that
that's
are
good and
different are,
helpful.
are sometimes threats to
Yeah.
our own, self-esteem or self-worth or who we think we are. We do feel
Yeah.
threatened when other people sort of challenge what we
Right.
believe or what we do. Yeah.
Right. So as we've been talking over the last six weeks or so, one of the things that we hear a lot from other people, and I know that I've at least thought or said, is, but I'm not a racist.
Right.
And Jarrell, you've helped me understand, there's some subtle, I don't know if differences is the right word, but definitions where there might be some racial biases at play. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're like this overt white supremacist, racist kind of person, but you've just got some things that kind of are part of the operating system for you. And there's a list that we thought it would be helpful to kind of go through. And you said, I think we should just call it things that make you go,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And I think the word you used appropriately was racial bias.
Yeah.
And we all have it. We all have it. I have it.
Yeah.
Have it. We all have ideas and thoughts about things that we don't know based on how it's been presented to us, or maybe even on limited experiences. So again, the key here is to understand that racial bias in and of itself it's what happens as a result of it that can be something that becomes an issue, right? And it's about checking ourselves when we have a thought or a feeling about something, and ask, why am I thinking this, or even worse, why am I behaving this way?
Yeah.
Have a justification for it, And again, this happens on both sides. I was talking with a friend this past week. No, it was last week. Yeah, last week. And he was telling me about this is a white friend of mine. He was telling me about experience that his son had with basketball. And the thought process was, well, from the other kids who were black, and this is when he was younger, what are you doing here? right? As if to say, well, you're white, so you can't play basketball, you know. And again, I think that what's so important is the conversation, because
Mhm.
the intent here is not to say you're a racist or I'm a racist. It's to open up our mind and start to think about and challenge some of the things that we have. And you know what's been really fun is Diane. Since we've been having this conversation, she'll come to me and she'll say, "I think I'm a racist." And I'm like, "Diane, you're not a racist. You're not. You think that you're a racist, you know." And certain thoughts that she might have, the things she might say, and
Yeah.
it's not unreasonable to have a thought or to say something. I mean, to think something. It's when you start to operate out of it, right? And you do things based on it, that it starts to become a problem. But just because you have a thought and it's based on what you know, it's not necessarily wrong. And it could be, but not necessarily.
Right.
Right?
Right.
If you don't mind, Dan, could you share the story about Tommy when he was in?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome sharing space in our office with Jarrell. Well, for both the guys, Josh and Jarrell. But I can say stuff. You know, Jarrell, I just had a thought. You know, and a couple weeks ago I said I had a thought of something that happened a long time ago. My son is in his early 50s now, and he was in middle school. And I went to the open house for parents one night, met all his teachers, and it was just a standard kind of thing. And when I got home, I was talking to him, and he shared a lot about his teachers. I like this one. This one's great. This one's not so good. One teacher he really liked, and I said, you never told me that Mr. So-and-so is Black. And my son looked at me for like 10 seconds, and he said, why would I tell you that? And first of all, I thought, I'm so glad he said that. I mean, to him, it's nothing. And then I thought, why did I say that? Would I expect him to say Mr. So-and-so is bald or Mr. So-and-so is tall? I said, why didn't you tell me Mr. So-and-so is Black? So that's what I said to Terrell. I said, I think that's like a racist part of me. And he reassured me that, yeah, there's a difference.
Right.
But that stuck with me for a long time.
Right. And it could be as simple as you haven't had a lot of experience at that time with Black teachers, so it does.
Well, but it was, I did. He had Black teachers. He had Black friends. So it was like it was a stupid question. And my son probably said, Mom, it's a stupid question. I don't remember. But yeah, it's just one of those things that you kind of think about after the years have passed. So yeah. I can always count on Jarrell to give me the straight scoop. I think if it had been a racist thought, he would have said, yeah, you're racist.
So I want to go through this list, and forgive me, but I can't remember who's reading the list. Am I reading the list?
Yeah.
Am I going to go through the list? Yeah. And I really appreciate a comment that was made that I think kind of tees up exactly what we're saying. I think this is good to just make sure everybody has heard. There are preconceived notions and low expectations toward people of color that have been ingrained in the white population. And she gives an example of schools in the past and what people of color were kind of guided towards by counselors. And because a couple of the things that I'll mention speak directly to that idea of being ingrained, almost a little to like Diane's story, like they kind of come out of us without us realizing it, or they fire off in our brain without us realizing it. So I kind of want to go through these, and I'm going to tell you up front, I'm going to be pretty honest about some of the things that I know I've thought, or I've heard people close to me think. I won't name names, but I think it's good for us to all go, okay, yeah, I have, right? So, like, for instance, are you concerned about renting to a Black person? If you're a landlord, and I know a lot of landlords, and I know a lot of them who this is never a concern. In fact, talked to one this week. I know it's never something that goes through their head, but sometimes some landlords might, where it's like, I've got an applicant to rent that's white and an applicant to rent that's Black. And I might have some things go through my head about what the condition of the house would be. if one family rented it over the other, or how reliable is the payment going to be? Those kinds of things.
Right. You know, one of the things I think about is a story from an associate, and you know what he said was he was going to rent an apartment, and he got the rental and what have you, and there's the landlord or the homeowner it was an apartment was walking him through after they finished. They looked him squarely in the eye and said, "Listen, you need to understand that we don't have any crime or gang violence or anything like that going on around here." And it wasn't said in a tone to say, "Hey, you're going to be happy here." It was saying, "So we don't want." The tone was, "And we don't want to see that from you." You know.
Mm.
So yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, I love that you gave this list that title, things that make you up. Like that's something to really think about. This next one is, do you become concerned about property values when someone Black moves into the neighborhood? I mean, I've heard that out of people's mouths, like, well, that's going to drive down what I'm going to be able to get for my house. And I'm like, to be honest, that's not one that's ever gone off in my brain. But that, to me, that's like, I would be totally crushed if I got wind that people said that because I moved into the neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
You know, again, with that one, if you think back to when we did the Gurney United rally a few years ago, one of the pastors actually said that based on his upbringing and what he was taught, that he had this concern about Blacks moving into his neighborhood because it was going to mess up his property value. And this is an upstanding Christian man, but again, a lot of it is things that we learn or we hear, and we just kind of take it to be what it is without processing that through. So yeah.
Because is it fair, do you think, for me to make this comment, and Jarrell, you can reach through the screen and slap me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of white people in situations like that associate with, if a Black person's moving into my neighborhood, the hood is moving into my neighborhood.
I think that's it could be
like that's what they assume.
It could be a number of assumptions. It could be that, okay, then now more Blacks will move into my neighborhood, or maybe it's that I don't think they're going to take care of the house, and because they won't take care of the house, it's going to drive property value down. I'm not sure what the actual motivation for it is, but it could be multiple things like that.
Yeah, it'd be amazing to live in a world where we actually said it'll make my property value go up the more diverse my community is, right? That should be the goal.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Have you ever asked someone, are they mixed? Or one that's closely related, have you ever asked someone, what are you?
Right. So again, like, I'm not sure the source of what that question is meant to be. Sherelle, my wife, who's Black and fair skinned, she gets that all the time. What are you? And it's from strangers. It's not like it's always even the conversation with people she knows, where they're trying to understand her heritage. And it's not even asked. It's not even, the question's not even phrased that way. Like, where your family from? What country or whatever. It's like, what are you? Or are you mixed?
Right.
And again, why? What's the purpose of that question? What does that mean? And it means nothing. Right? But you have to also think about how that makes people feel when you ask them that. If someone walked up to you and said, what are you? What do you mean, what am I? So.
I mean, what it makes me think of is when you meet somebody's dog and you go, what is this?
Right.
And it's just so like demeaning, different from what you said, like, where are you from? Kind of thing, or something that's a little more like, tell me your story, then let me insult your humanity.
Right.
This one is like, yeah, well, I'll just read it. Have you ever told someone they don't sound Black? And where I've heard this one, where I've said this, I remember, honestly, I remember saying things like, they're articulate.
Yes.
Like that was taught, not taught, nobody sat me down and was like, hey, you should say this if, but like, why would we say that? You're so articulate. the implication is for a Black person, right? Because you don't ever say that to a white person.
Right. Yeah. The first time I thought about it actually comes from a comedy skit, but also in truth is when one of the compliments that Colin Powell would receive as a Joint Chief of Staff was that he's so articulate. But
Right.
Joint Chief of Staff, that should be a prerequisite. That should be assumed that the person who becomes a Joint Chief of Staff is in fact articulate, right?
Right.
Or you know, again, because this is not with regard to thinking about politics, but a statement that was made by a prominent politician, right, about Barack Obama, and this is the one that you told me, Diane, is that what he said was when he was running for the first time, well, he's articulate and he's clean. Was that what you told me?
Yep. Yep. But he was pretty unknown. You know, he was still a senator, or even, you know, in Illinois politics. Yeah, he's articulate and he's clean. It's like, what?
Right.
I remember, so when I was growing up, I idolized Michael Jordan. I mean, I just thought he was the everything. I mean, my room was plastered in posters of him. I wanted to be like him. I mean, I lived that Gatorade song. But I remember people saying, like, yeah, he's a great role model. He's so articulate because of the way he would handle himself in interviews and press conferences and things like that. You know, and when I was a kid, I didn't really think about, but I mean, what was being said to me covertly was, it's acceptable for you as a white person to have a Black person as your hero because he's an articulate Black person.
Hmm.
And again, I don't know that they meant that consciously, but that's what kind of came through, you know, when you say, because he doesn't sound Black, kind of thing.
Yeah. Could this be a good point to interject a kind of a question here? Because I think it's relevant. Says, I never would have thought of this conversation like, what are you? In school, we talk about what we are: German, Swedish, Brazilian, Nigerian. How can we ask that question to celebrate our heritage without offending someone else? Is there a way to have that conversation?
Yeah, I think that's a hard conversation to have. And it's a hard, you know, I mean, I can't go into a lot of detail because we could spend the next hour talking about it, but it's a hard conversation to go into because of the fact that there's a missing link, so to speak, right? You know, like, you know, people may say, well, yeah, I'm German, or my family is German, or, you know, Irish, and so on and so forth, you know, which kind of takes it to a country, right? And so then you're Irish American and German American, you know, or, you know, whatever. All I can say is African American, which is a continent, not a country, right? So it's a sensitive spot because I can't tell you, you know, how my history goes, what my, you know, are they from Ghana or Nigeria or any of those? I have no way of knowing that because it wasn't some voluntary process of immigration by which this heritage was able to be maintained. So I think it becomes sensitive in that nature to understand that to begin with. And, you know, I guess one, you probably shouldn't do that to strangers because they don't know who you are, why you're asking. And if you're interested in finding it out from your friends, then I think it is a situation where you ask in an appropriate way. Like, could you share, you know, I'd love to hear, can you share anything about your heritage or something along those lines, or your ancestry or something like that? Maybe that's the way you ask the question. You know, someone just posted something and I think it's a really good question.
Good. It's really good.
This is a really good question. The person says, do white people ask each other who they are or what they are?
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Because the answer is no, we don't.
No.
We don't.
Yeah,
that's really good. It's funny because I think when you put a lot of some of the things that we're talking about in that context of, do white people do that to white people? You don't. I mean, and I'll ask people. A friend now that lives in our neighborhood, when I first met her at the bus stop, she's the parent of one of the kids that rides the bus with my kids. she has an accent. So I asked her, where are you from? I've noticed your accent or whatever, but I think it's totally different from what are you? And I love somebody's comment too that knows your wife. They say, just say I'm beautiful. That's what I am. And I think that's good. I think that's really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. If you're a cashier, have you ever been more suspect of a Black person returning an item without a receipt? I've never been a cashier, but I'm sure that that's gone through people's minds, right? Like those are just those small little things that I think we don't even know where they came from half the time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you lock your doors when a Black person crosses the street at the crosswalk? I'll share a story that's recent, and I think between Diane and I, Jarrell has turned into the racial confessional. But I don't lock my doors, but this was within the last 2 months. In fact, it was somewhere between now and when we had Gurney United. So I'd even been part of a Stand Together Against Racism event. I was at a stoplight on Grand Avenue in Gurney, and at the crosswalk were 3 Black kids. And I remember it going off in my head, there goes trouble. And, the one kid had his hat on sideways. Their pants were hanging a little low. But in that moment, I caught myself and I went, to Martha's point, I would not have thought that if those were 3 white kids. I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But I had this moment of like, they're out, and they were laughing, they were having a good time. They're being kids. Like they're just being kids. But because they were Black, there was this annoying, subtle little extra layer that was there in my mind. And I told Jarrell the next day, like, I can't believe here I am, somebody that's trying to stand alongside of the Black community and for the Black community. And I still have things like that. And I think that's important, right? That's one of the things we talk about why we would want to do this, is to help people go, we have this stuff go through our head, right?
Right. And I think it's important to understand that and ask where that come from. And I'm not supplying the answer where it came from, but there's something that makes us think that way and feel that way, right? And so, to that same perspective of being honest, the situations where I do the exact same thing, right? And the question is, why am I doing that, right? And it's because of the things that I've learned or the things I expect to be the case, even though they're not necessarily the case. Yeah. And so, again, that's why the conversation is so important, because if we can't be honest with what we're thinking and feeling, we don't get anywhere. And then another point I think that's really important with regard to what you said about the whole crosswalk situation is that's how my fears come about with regard to my boys.
Right.
Because if in them walking across the street, which it could have been Jarrell, Joel, and Jamel walking across the street, right? And you felt this sense of threat. If they had said something to you, you might respond differently because you're already at an elevated level of concern, where if you weren't concerned, you would perceive them differently. And so that's one of my biggest fears, is that not that they're doing anything, but someone might perceive them to be a threat or to be different in a negative way before they've actually done anything to deserve that, and thus respond to that as a result of that.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's scary to think what some people say and do simply because they're running on some adrenaline spiked assumption.
Mm-hmm.
It's really scary.
Yeah.
Let's see. Are you hesitant to use a Black salesperson for things like buying a car? I can just read I'll just read a couple off, and if there's a comment, we can jump in with those. But again, this is our list of like things that make you go, have I ever thought that? And again, none of us are saying like, if you've ever thought this, you are a racist. It's you may have some racial biases that need wrestling in your own heart and mind. Do you have a higher sense of concern when a Black person is in your home as a service provider or a repairman comes to your house? Do you tense up when you encounter Black males you don't know in a public setting? There's been studies done about that, where white people have almost an involuntary reaction when a Black person they don't know is coming towards them on the street. And that's one of the things Andy Stanley says, that's a fact, and facts don't have feelings. Like, it's just reality, and we need to deal with the reality, and we can't just kind of go, well, I don't like that that's the case.
Right.
That is the case, and we need to work on that.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you have reservations about hiring someone who's Black? Do you have concerns when you find out your new coworker is Black? Do you think in 240 years that has progressed is having one non-white male president out of 45? Like, do you think that's progress?
Right. And I think that's something like to sit for a minute, right? In our 40-year history of presidents, only one has been a non-white male, right? And so between people of Blacks, people of color, and women, right? So what's something's wrong, right? If in 240 years, the only option that's been available to us, or the only, it's something to think about. Why is that, why is that the case? And why is it that when we do get one, we feel like that's that's like, hey, this is significant progress. And I'm not knocking that it isn't, right? But it's not that this is progress, but why don't we have more progress? I guess is the thing to think about.
Yeah, and we got to stay away from the pitfall of thinking, well, we made progress and now we're done progressing because we've gotten one African American president. There was a clip from a show not long ago that I thought was so interesting, where this new hire is watching kind of the onboarding video that celebrates the company. He's sitting at like a cube watching it on a computer, and in the video it's people from all corners of the world, and it's very diverse, and they even say in the video how much they value diversity. And then over this guy's shoulder you see the boardroom, so this is where the power is at, and out of the boardroom come 15 old white guys. And I'll be honest, at first I didn't even catch it, but my wife, who does diversity training around the country, she goes, did you see that? There's a brilliant comment of the power still. We've given opportunities along the way, but the power still remains in the seat of a white male. And it's truth, right? Like, we just need to sit with that. Would you tense up if your child decided to date or marry a Black man? Like, that's an important one, I think. I wonder about that a lot in more in my generation. Had I come, and I'm not saying anything about my parents, but what would it have been like if I had come home dating a Black girl? What would have fired off? And I think if you're a parent and you're watching this, it's really important that you think about that. That you do. If you use the word thug, does it have a deeper meaning to you? Right? Or another way of asking that is, do you ever apply the word thug to a white person? Right? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think, thug is a generic word, right? But what I've noticed is the use of the word and how it's used sometimes. And so the question is like, what is there any deeper meaning? And I don't know that there's deeper meaning, but I think it's, again, something to think about, right? Is this
Mhm.
a new word that we can use that's more appropriate than other words when we,
Yeah.
and it might not mean anything, but again, these are things to think about. And even going back to the question about like, what is your initial response when you find out that your child is dating or about to be engaged to a person of color or a Black person? Is you might have concern and reservation. Concern and reservation doesn't make you a racist. And I want to keep on under. This is about
Yeah.
why do we think the way we think. Your concern might simply be they're going to have a rough life. And because I know they're going to have a rough life, I'm concerned about my child having to navigate this really difficult situation. Or maybe it's something else. But
Yeah.
if you have a visceral response, you have to ask yourself the question, why am I having that response?
Yeah. Things that make you go, hmm. This is the last one. If your knowledge of Black history is limited to Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Frederick Douglass, and a few others, that should make you go, hmm. And again, opportunity for me to be transparent. We were talking just this last week, Jarrell, and you named probably 5 or 6 people that I did not know who they were.
Right.
And it's easy for me to chalk that up to, a bad history teacher or whatever. But that history teacher is teaching curriculum, right? And I think that's when we talk about systems in place, that's part of that system.
Right. I think one of the, just like my statement that inheritance matters, or the statement that different is not necessarily wrong. The other thing that I think is really important is that Black history is American history.
Yeah, and that's so good.
And why we talk about Black history as opposed to American history is because in American history we don't always talk about Black history. And I think that's really important because it's not a chapter, it's not chapter 13 in your history book. Black history is American history. It's throughout all of American history.
Yeah.
From Crispus Attucks to Ida B. Wells and Fannie Lou Hamer and C.J. Madam Walker and Charles Drew, Garrett Morgan. These are all people that have made significant contributions to America, and a lot of us have no idea who they are. Why don't we know who they are? We should, because Charles Drew revolutionized how we do blood transfusions, blood banks, right? That's a significant contribution. So people like Benjamin Banneker and his role in developing the Washington D.C. and the grid and all that kind of stuff. Again, these are significant people who have made significant contributions. And so again, I feel like we should know more of them because they're part of history. And when they're not part of history and and they become something else, then it's like, well, why we're talking about them because no one else is. And so then we have this thing called Black history because these people who have made substantial contributions are not part of the American history story.
Yeah.
Right.
Is it any wonder that I think Black people sometimes feel invisible? I mean, I don't know if that's true, but that comes to me. We don't know any of these people. We're all invisible. Nobody sees us except in a negative way. Josh, quick question about the statements that you just read. Is there a book where you're getting these questions from? Somebody wants to know, is there something that we could read that would kind of expound on these, or did you make them up, or where did they come from?
I think they're a result of conversations, right?
Okay. All right.
Talk about crossing the street, right? Or we have the pastor who talked about the value of neighborhoods when someone moves in. And so it's based on other people and their stories and their experiences. Either experiencing it from the Black side of it, or a white person saying, you know what, I actually have done that. So it's actually a combination of
Yeah, which is a perfect transition into kind of where I want to end our time, because I want to respect everybody. We're just a couple minutes past 8. Is just going back to the value of friendship with people who don't look like you. so that you can hear about their experience. And the beauty of friendship is that you can be honest and vulnerable and transparent. And, Diane and I are testaments to that is exactly what's happened with Jarrell. We've gotten to the place where I feel like I can tell him some of the whacked out, crazy things I've thought.
Mhm.
And he, when I told him about the boys at the crosswalk, he didn't look at me and go, dude, you're a racist. His response was, well, I've had thoughts like that too, maybe going the other way, right? Like, so the conversation that can come from that, that's why I love that we can say that list is really a result of just us being friends and us being honest enough with each other to talk through that. And Jarrell being courageous enough to say, like, you probably have never thought about this, but, and then being, both of us just listening to each other's experience. There's a quote by a guy named John Blake, who's a journalist in Atlanta. And I love this quote by an article he wrote. He said, I believe another way to fight fear of Black men is through exposure. Until more white people actually live among and befriend Black people, this fear will persist. And I just think that that's so powerful and so necessary for us to be purposed about. A lot of people have asked me, and I know they've asked Jarrell as well, what can we do? What should we do about this? And, one of the things Jarrell's done is he said, I'll take anybody to coffee that wants to. Let's talk. And my response is more and more, it's like, make friends with people who are outside your norm, and different than you, and make that friendship about listening to each other and hearing each other out. Because I think personal experience is the way forward. And we mentioned it quickly, a video that I recommend everybody look up. And I believe if you just look up the name Daryl Davis, you're going to find it. Jarrell actually just sent me this today, and I watched it with goosebumps for 10 minutes. It is an unbelievable story of the power of friendship. So just so that it's couched right, because if you find this and you watch it, you're going to think that maybe Jarrell, Diane, and Josh were accusing you of being a white supremacist and maybe a member of the KKK. We are not. I'll say this again. We are not. But the story you will watch in that video is the power of what happened when a Black man befriended the leader of a KKK
Chapter.
region. Yeah, chapter. And to me, it was such a man, if friendship can do that, friendship can do anything. And it all just points back to what Jesus said, right? Now I give you a new commandment. Love one another. Love one another the way I have loved you. And I think that in the end, that's what friendship is. I'm going to love Jarrell, and Jarrell's going to love me, despite the knucklehead things I say or think, right? And, we learn best in that. Like I said at the beginning, I've learned more from Jarrell than I have any book, any video, any study, because of our friendship. And, my last note on that, one coffee doesn't make you friends. And I think it's important for people to hear me say this. Jarrell and I have worked in the same office for 5 years now. It wasn't like that at the beginning. At the beginning, I was cautious, and I'm sure he was too. And we didn't talk a lot about racial things. But as our friendship grew and we got closer and closer, and we had time and experience with one another to see that we could trust each other, that's where that came from. So I'm encouraging you to a long-term investment. And I don't mean that as a slight on Jarrell, you offering to have coffee with people. I believe it would be the beginning of a friendship. So that's not what that was meant to say. But invest long-term in people who don't look like you. And I believe it'll be the time you've best invested in your life. So there's one other thing we want to recommend, and Jarrell, you can talk to, because I haven't been able to watch it yet, but it's called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. Can you just real quickly describe what that is so people can find it?
Yeah, so Emmanuel Acho, I believe is the way you pronounce his last name, Emmanuel with the E. He's about a month ago started these YouTube videos called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. He's a former Philadelphia Eagles football player, and his first conversation was with Matthew McConaughey, and it's about 10 minutes long. And Matthew, kind of like what we've done. Matthew kind of says, "Hey, I have a question about this," and he does his best to answer them. And then I feel like the second one, maybe the third one, because I can't remember them all. There are 4 so far, was with Chip and Joanna Gaines, and they did the same thing. He sat down with them, and they asked him questions, and he answered them, and the kids also asked questions as well. And the most recent one, I'm missing one of the people that he had on, but the most recent one was really good because it included 2 couples, biracial, black and white husband and wives. So it's a black husband and a white wife, and then a black wife and a white husband. And he talks with them about marriage and the complications that they've had and the challenges with regard to their families and friends. Anyways, again, it's Uncomfortable Conversations with the Black Man with Emmanuel Acho. So.
Cool. Yeah, look them up. There's all kinds of great resources out there. And, I'm not a huge reader. I like video and things like that. And thankfully, there's a ton of really good stuff out there. So I encourage you to look at those. We'll be back next Monday. We're doing this every Monday in July at 7 p.m. I believe it's recorded, so the video is also available later on YouTube, but we do this live on Facebook. And I do just want to say again, thank you to everybody that's joined us. This is an important conversation, and it just says a lot about you and your heart in that you give up an hour every week for this. And I do want to say thanks to Diane for joining us and being willing to share transparently your story with us as well, Diane. And then Jarrell, as always, you are the most courageous person I know. And I so appreciate you being willing to talk with us and have this conversation in front of everybody. It's really amazing.
Thank you. Well, it's my pleasure. And I always appreciate the fact that we're doing this because it's at the end of the day, you are the one who's saying, "Hey, let's do this." There was a quick question on how do you spell Daryl, and it's Daryl, Daryl Davis. And we can share the link also for anyone that wants it, as well as the link to the Emmanuel Acho videos as well, so that anyone that wants to see those can see those. And then the only other thing was, and I thought about it when I was having the conversation with Joanna last week, because Sherelle and I are both getting lots of requests to have coffee, and they're piling up. So the thought was, if you have a small group, I'd love to come talk with your small group, and you can ask all the questions that you want. So again, I'm available.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome. You are a gift, man. You're a gift in that we get to have this kind of dialogue.
Yeah.
So
thanks a million.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. We're going to say goodbye for tonight. We'll look forward to next Monday, 7 o'clock. See you then.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.